it's not so much a question of if this will happen anymore, but rather more a question of exactly when this will happen and how many people in this country will become infected and how many of those will develop severe or more complicated disease.
That message from Dr. Ann Schuchat, the Principal Deputy Director of the CDC, was echoed in a conference call by Dr. Nancy Messonnier, Director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases.
The data over the last week in the spread in other countries has certainly raised our level of concern and raised our level of expectation that we are going to have community spread here.
Her warning to the American public was personal and direct.
I had a conversation with my family over breakfast this morning, and I told my children that while I didn't think that they were at risk right now, we as a family need to be preparing for significant disruption of our lives.
This is a very serious public health condition worldwide. We are taking this incredibly serious here in the United States. We are doing the most aggressive containment efforts in modern history to prevent further spread in the United States. We're going to continue taking those measures, but we are realistic that we will see more cases, and as we see more cases, we might have to take community mitigation efforts.
The Centers for Disease Control says the coronavirus could soon turn into a pandemic sweeping across the globe. Employers and schools should be prepared to limit travel and large meetings, allow workers to telework, be ready to close schools or allow internet school work, and hospitals may need to delay elective surgeries. Meanwhile, the virus continues its global march from China to Japan to South Korea to Singapore to Italy. Deserted streets, empty airports, but long lines for surgical masks that are running low. The spike in cases in Italy leading some American universities to suspend their study abroad programs. In South Korea, the first U.S. service member has now tested positive for the virus. The diagnosis coming just one day after the U.S. and South Korea announced they were considering scaling back joint military exercises over coronavirus concerns. In Iran, the country's health minister, who had said the virus is under control as he showed symptoms himself, later announced he too is sick. With a 2% mortality rate at the epicenter in China, the coronavirus seems to be far deadlier than the seasonal flu. But in India, President Trump downplayed the risk.
You may ask about the coronavirus, which is very well under control in our country.
The White House is asking Congress for $2.5 billion in emergency funding to deal with the crisis. Leading Democrats and some Republicans say that's hardly enough. This morning, the world's eyes on a virus that shows no signs of slowing down.
The spread of the coronavirus. The World Health Organization says the risk of the virus expanding worldwide is now classified as very high. And there are new cases of the disease here in the United States. 16 cases so far have been detected and confirmed in the U.S. Another 47 people were evacuated from the Diamond Princess cruise ship and from the region in China where the coronavirus originated, for a total of 63 patients. They are being treated in 8 different states. But overnight, more suspected cases are popping up, some of them leaving doctors with more questions. Michael George is here with the latest. Michael, good morning.
Good morning. There are new suspected cases in California, Oregon, and Washington. Doctors treating the 2 patients in California and Oregon don't know how either of them may have contracted the disease. None of the patients had traveled to an area where coronavirus has circulated, nor have they come into close contact with a confirmed case. As health officials try to contain the virus, it continues to put millions of people in this country on edge and rattle the markets.
I understand that this news is concerning. However, I want to reassure you that our state and local authorities are responding quickly to the case.
Oregon Governor Kate Brown announced Friday someone in her state tested positive for coronavirus. While the Centers for Disease Control haven't confirmed the diagnosis, the patient is in isolation at a hospital.
This is a case of community spread of the disease, much like the case from California earlier this week.
The CDC says it's aware of another suspected case of community spread in Santa Clara County, California. Health officials say the patient is an older woman with no known contact with the disease.
What we know now is that the virus is here, present at some level, but we still don't know to what degree.
While the CDC is trying to track down anyone who's come into contact with these patients, the government health agency admitted Friday there's a shortage of test kits. So far, fewer than 500 people in the U.S. have been tested. Meanwhile, stores have been selling out of face masks, and the FDA warned there could be potential disruptions to supply or shortages of critical medical products, with as many as 20 medications with ingredients from China already at risk. The coronavirus sent another shiver down the spines of investors Friday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was clobbered for a 7th straight day. The key stock index lost 3,500 points this week, wiping out more than $3 trillion worth of value.
This has happened fast and furious, and there's way more unknowns than there are known.
The travel industry could suffer as well, losing potentially more than $46 billion a month, as United Airlines announced it's suspending service to major hubs in Asia. Americans are canceling more trips, while travel insurance demand jumped 60%.
We're telling people that they should make sure their health insurance is in place before they go, that they should see their health provider before they travel, and certainly have all their health insurance documents with them when they're traveling.
And a number of colleges and universities are suspending their study abroad programs and recalling students to the U.S. And Amazon has told its 800,000 employees to postpone any non-essential travel, both internationally and within the U.S. Jeff?
Well, all right, Michael, thank you very much. While U.S. health officials work to contain the spread of the virus here, 8 more countries announced their first cases on Friday. To date, more than 83,000 cases have been reported worldwide, the vast majority in China. Cases have been confirmed in 53 nations. The virus is blamed for more than 2,800 deaths so far since it was first reported late last year. This morning, the State Department is urging Americans to reconsider travel to Italy, where there are more cases than anywhere outside Asia. Charlie D'Agata is in Rome. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Nowhere in Europe has been hit as hard as Italy. Another 200 or so cases have been announced, and now there are new fears that this virus may have been around for weeks before it was picked up. There is growing evidence that Italy has not only been one of the epicenters of the global outbreak, it helped export its spread around the world.
We don't know when the virus has arrived. Maybe that arrived earlier than we detected.
He said the virus went viral, with carriers traveling from here undetected too. Originating from China, the virus has now spread to more than 60 countries and counting. New Zealand, Nigeria, Lithuania, Belarus, Azerbaijan are the latest countries to report new cases. But South Korea has seen the largest surge. More than 800 new cases in a single day have swollen figures to more than 3,100, the largest outbreak outside of China. Health ministers are urging residents to stay indoors and by all means avoid all public events, including church gatherings. Japan has taken even more draconian measures, canceling classes for more than 12 million students, shutting down schools for a month in order to stem the spread of the virus. Iran, another country that has given rise to a cluster of infections, took the extraordinary step of canceling Friday prayers for the first time since the revolution in 1979.
One person with coronavirus in King County, Washington State, has died. This now makes the first coronavirus death confirmed in the U.S. Also, in just a few minutes, President Donald J. Trump will update Americans on the coronavirus.
I want to provide an update to our people, to our citizens, to the world, frankly, on our action to address the coronavirus and those that have been hurt badly by it. At this moment, we have 22 patients in the United States currently that have coronavirus. Unfortunately, one person passed away overnight.
Monday afternoon, and Iran's deputy health minister seeks to calm fear over the spread of the coronavirus. Coughing and visibly sweating, Iraj Hareshi says the situation is almost stable and the government is handling it.
In regards to quarantine measures, we are not in favour of them. Stone Age measures like quarantine were done before World War I to deal with outbreaks like the plague.
But fast forward just a few hours.
I wanted to inform you that I am coronavirus positive. I had a fever yesterday. My initial test turned out to be positive late in the evening. Since last night, I have put myself under quarantine.
Over a dozen people have died in Iran, meaning it now has one of the highest numbers of deaths outside of China. On Monday, several neighboring countries declared their first cases of the virus, all believed to be linked to travelers from Iran. This has prompted the United Arab Emirates to suspend all flights between the two countries. Iranian authorities have cancelled public events, closed schools, and urged people to avoid large crowds. In Iran's capital, Tehran, people are doubtful over their government's response.
We are very scared. The whole world is affected and it is spreading. The state TV gives us statistics, but when we go to the hospitals, we see something different. The number of people who have died is much higher.
The Deputy Health Minister's announcement has further deepened distrust towards a government already resented for a stagnating economy and the recent downing of a Ukrainian airliner.
Hello, Shane. Now, you're standing outdoors. What's the latest measures there? Are you required to wear a face mask?
Well, officials here are recommending those in public places to wear face masks, but they are hard to come by. There's been a mass shortage of those. But to give you an idea of where I'm standing, normally on a weekend like this plaza here in central Seoul would be crowded with protesters and ralliers, but the government has banned public rallies. You can see announcements being made that all public rallies are banned under the law, under the contagious disease prevention law here in South Korea. But officials here are saying that this weekend will be a, quote, critical juncture in this fight against the spread of this coronavirus. Again, we saw nearly 600 new cases, bringing the total number close to 3,000, but 90% of these new cases still remain down in the southeastern part of the country in Daegu. And of course, 80% of those cases in Daegu are connected to this one church. And that's why officials have been very ambitious to try and test every single member. There are 9,000 members in this Daegu branch of this church alone. They say they're about 88% complete. And that's why we're going to see numbers continue to balloon here for the time being.
No one knows exactly how this coronavirus might take off in different nations around the globe, but experts say there are indicators.
When we look at what countries are most vulnerable, it's clear that it's those countries that have the weaker public health systems in place.
To his point, compare what's happening in Singapore versus Iran. Despite its ties and close proximity to China, Singapore is reporting far fewer cases than Iran. Experts say the strength of Singapore's healthcare system has allowed it to react quickly. Containing a virus requires early detection, isolation and treatment of sick patients, and tracing contacts who may also be infected.
So there's several countries in Africa that don't have that ability to test. There may be cases already, and if you don't have that ability to test, it becomes really hard to respond to it.
The World Health Organization has identified 13 vulnerable African countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and Algeria. Airports on the continent are screening passengers and lab tests are arriving. But some of those nations are dealing with Ebola, measles, and other outbreaks. An influx of COVID-19 patients, especially severe cases, could overwhelm hospitals. But experts say the SARS virus did not take hold in Africa, and COVID-19 may not either.
We've seen a few cases here and there, but we're not seeing the widespread transmission that I think we were all concerned would happen.
There's also cautious optimism about South America. Scientists don't know if warmer climates play a role, but countries with younger populations will likely see fewer illnesses. Data so far shows COVID-19 is hitting people over 60 hard, and that could take a toll on developed countries.
The U.S. right now, I think, is our big concern. And the primary reason why I say that is the debate about how they're able to do diagnostic testing at this point.
Unlike in Singapore and here in Canada, the U.S. has been restrictive in who can be tested for COVID-19. Some fear it's missed the first infected patients and may not be able to contain the virus. Ultimately, no one knows how this outbreak will evolve. With a vaccine at least a year away and no proven antivirals yet, Citizens and public healthcare systems worldwide should be prepared for the worst. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
The smiles at the New York Stock Exchange couldn't mask what was a disastrous week for world stock markets. Friday's trading only deepening the losses. The Dow Jones Index ended down 13% from record highs, with U.S. markets seeing their biggest weekly sell-off since the 2008 financial crisis. It's been a similar story for London's main FTSE 100 index and stocks in Europe, while no fewer than 7 markets in Asia have lost more than 10% of their value. Fueling the plunge, the spread of the coronavirus outside of China. Deserted streets in Milan heightening concerns that COVID-19 is making an inevitable march across the globe.
It's a bloodbath on global exchanges. Despite all the warnings, investors are doing exactly what we're not meant to do in a situation like this. They're panicking. The Dow Jones had its worst one-day point drop in history, tumbling almost 4.5% yesterday. I'm scared to look today. Like so many people who hold stocks, the virus has well and truly infected Asian exchanges. Shanghai's composite down by 3.7%, a similar case for the Nikkei in Tokyo, considering that they could be calling off the Olympics. We're not sure yet. It's planned for July, August, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng closed down by almost 2.5%. I've been hearing stories all day of panic. Lots of travellers have been cancelling holidays, people in some parts of the world stockpiling food, others stashing away medicine or hoarding protective masks. Chemists here in Berlin have been running out. Disinfectant is in high demand, and supply chains in general are faltering. The urgency all mirrored on financial markets.
Markets around the world are sinking fast. It's the worst week in a decade for global stocks. And investors in Hong Kong aren't the only ones seeking safer territory. In London, where some firms like Chevron sent their workers home this week, the FTSE dropped 4.5% early on Friday. Elsewhere in Europe, losses on Frankfurt's DAX index reached more than 5%. Germany's and the world's biggest chemicals maker, BASF, says it's braced for the unpredictable impact of coronavirus.
Danke, Hans.
Lower demand and production outages in many industries are already visible consequences of the measures taken to prevent the further spread of the virus. We anticipate that the adverse effects of the coronavirus will have a significant impact worldwide, particularly in the first and second quarters of this year. As the coronavirus continues to spread to more and more countries, so does its negative impact on their economies. This is Milan in northern Italy, Europe's worst affected area. Normally busy tourist hotspots are now deserted and restaurants are empty. The International Monetary Fund says it's still getting to grips with how deep the global effects will be.
The virus is going to have an impact on growth. A lot just depends on the speed of recovery in China, in other countries, the spillover effects, the effects on supply chains.
With concern about the economic and health implications of coronavirus growing, governments are looking for global solutions. But experts warn that the world is not prepared for what may be down the road.
OK, let's bring in Andrea Heng in Singapore and Chelsea Delaney in Frankfurt, our financial correspondents. Chelsea, starting with you, crash or correction? What are we seeing here?
I think for now it's a correction that could very easily turn into a longer-term crash. Investors are very concerned, A, that this could turn into a global recession, but B, also about the unpredictability of this situation. We don't know at this point how much further the virus is going to spread, what this is going to do to businesses, if it's going to lead to more production shutdowns, to more supply chain disruptions, how this is going to impact consumers. So there's all these big questions that are really unanswerable right now. But if this does turn into a global recession, this could certainly put an end to this 11-year rally in stocks that we've been in.
We've had good times. Andrea, to steal a term of yours, the numbers are dropping like flies today. But what's interesting is there's no single safe haven that investors are running to.
You're right over there. And it was red all over the markets, probably redder than the jacket that I'm wearing right now. Even here in Singapore, stocks were tumbling down to a 15-month low. The benchmark STI dropping down to 3.2%. But since you're asking, there actually is one safe haven that investors are looking to park their money at in these jittery times, and that's technology stocks. Now, according to one report, investors found that technology stocks are the more resilient ones compared to traditional blue chip stocks, and so a lot of people are pumping their money in there. Analysts say that there are two reasons to this. It's a show that the government, Chinese government particularly, is introducing the right support measures amid the outbreak, but at the same time, it's also because Chinese consumers themselves are starting to look at technology stocks and technology products ever since the US sanctions on China.
Okay, Singapore is a hub of oil activity. Tell us what oil markets are doing this hour.
Well, obviously, it is tumbling there as well, but the coronavirus isn't the only reason for the lower numbers in the oil markets. There's also one other culprit, and that's Asian demand in general. Now, just to give you some numbers, Ben, analysts say that the demand in Asia for refined oil products is going to tumble rather, and that number is 380,000 barrels per day. Now, just to give you a comparison, that number in 2019 was 780,000 barrels per day. It's a lot to do with the slower economic activity in China, yes, due to the coronavirus outbreak, but also with the recession that's looming because of the US sanctions. They're putting a lot of pressure on the Chinese economy, so demand generally is slower, and producers are slashing operating rates. Climate change is actually the second biggest reason behind this, with warmer than usual winter months contributing to those lower numbers.
And the travel industry, of course, is one that needs a lot of oil. It's going through its worst week since 9/11, Chelsea.
Yeah, the Stock 600's travel and leisure section, which mostly includes airlines, is down a whopping 20% this week. Airlines have obviously been hit really hard by having to cancel flights to China since last month, but they are also now facing similar travel shutdowns, travel bans, and other disruptions for the European market as well. We've seen a lot of companies in the airline industry come out and say that they're going to be putting people on leave, that they're going to be stopping hiring. Lufthansa here in Germany, Air France has also made similar announcements, and one analyst estimated that this could cut 100 billion euros from the airline industry's revenues this year.
Chelsea, can I just ask you really quickly, are we going to see emergency action from central banks?
Emergency action from central banks is really in the spotlight today. A lot of investors think that the central banks, the Fed, the ECB, need to come out and really reassure markets and investors and consumers right now. But so far, what we've heard from central bankers, including Christine Lagarde here in Frankfurt yesterday, was that they don't really believe that this is going to be a long-term economic problem, and they're not really ready to step in with interest rate cuts.
Chelsea Delaney in Frankfurt there for us, and Andrea Heng in Singapore. Thank you too. We'll look at the effects the coronavirus is having on certain sectors now. Officials calling off the Geneva International Motor Show, the biggest in the world. It was scheduled to begin next week, but the Swiss government has banned gatherings of 1,000 people or more. Last year, over 500,000 people attended. British low-cost airline EasyJet says it's witnessed a significant softening of demand as a result of the virus. The drop is primarily on flights in and out of its northern Italian bases. So far this year, EasyJet's shares have fallen more than 20%. And British Airways says it's expecting a drop in profits this year due to cancelled flights off the back of the coronavirus. Flights to and from China, Italy, Singapore and South Korea have been cancelled. The growing spread of the coronavirus is sparking the sell-off of so-called pandemic bonds. They're an initiative of the World Bank. The bonds aim at shifting some of the burden of preparing against the pandemic onto financial markets instead of low-income countries most at risk of a pandemic.
But investors are becoming increasingly concerned about the effect that COVID-19 is having across the world. Speaking to The Guardian, head of global economics at consultancy Capital Economics said, One thing becoming clear is that we just can't predict the spread of this and how bad it will be. But it's not difficult to get something similar to the 2008 crisis with a pandemic situation. Of course, we hope it won't get that bad. The real concern is if this outbreak gets even worse, businesses may be forced to cease trading worldwide, and there's very little governments or markets can do to prevent the downturn that this would cause. As the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, John Cunliffe, put it, if it's a pure adverse supply shock, there is not much monetary policy can do. Essentially, if goods and services stop being produced and businesses stop operating as normal, there's not a whole lot that monetary policy can do to stabilise the situation. And as we're already seeing, this is starting to play out in some parts of the world, with some factories in China having been closed for weeks. In fact, and this isn't even a promo for us, if anything it's the opposite, our pin badge supplier has been closed for weeks, meaning that some of our orders have been significantly delayed. Don't worry, we've notified everyone affected, but it's a tiny example of how these closures affect businesses all over the world. In fact, somewhat ironically, the same is true for RB. Despite demand increasing for their disinfectants like Dettol and Lysol, their maker says that they're facing supply chain and distribution issues following the outbreak. But the greatest impact of these closures has obviously been in China. Towards the beginning of the month, Chinese economists warned that the coronavirus could reduce the country's GDP growth by up to 1%. A significant drop, which Zheng Gang, vice chair of the National Institute for Finance and Development, compared to the 2003 SARS epidemic, saying that in the short term, the epidemic's impact on economic activity cannot be ignored, especially with tertiary industries and small enterprises, with tight cash flows facing greater pressures. And he's not the only one making the prediction, with many expecting a wave of bankruptcies in China following the outbreak. A wave which could affect not just business owners and investors, but also drive up unemployment. Looking around the world though, it's clear that the impact is spreading down the production line. An economist from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business said that with Chinese business activity at 20% of normal rates, the effects on American growth will be huge, even in the best case scenario.
Desidero esprimere nuovamente la mia vicinanza ai malati del coronavirus e agli operatori sanitari che li curano.
As a precaution amid the coronavirus epidemic, the Pope's general audience was held outside in St. Peter's Square. The Pope's ride around the square in the Pope-mobile was faster than usual. However, that didn't stop this group of pilgrims from Mexico from giving Pope Francis an enthusiastic message. Although the Pope-mobile didn't make any stops, before beginning his catechesis, Pope Francis greeted this little girl. In the square, there were several people wearing face masks as a preventive measure against the coronavirus. Pope Francis directed a message to the sick during his catechesis.
Desidero esprimere nuovamente la mia vicinanza ai malati del coronavirus e agli operatori sanitari che li curano, come pure alle autorità civili e a tutti coloro che si stanno impegnando per assistere i pazienti e fermare il contagio.
In his catechesis, the Pope reflected on the beginning of Lent. He alluded to Jesus' 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. He explained Lent is a time to practice silence in one's heart.
Quando ero bambino, non c'era la televisione, ma c'era l'abitudine di non ascoltare la radio al Quaresima e deserto. È il tempo per rinunciare, per staccarsi dal cellulare e connetterci al Vangelo. È il tempo per rinunciare a parole inutili, a chiacchiere.
During Lent, the Pope asked Christians to practice charity and to not let themselves fall into verbal violence.
Oggi si insulta come se si dicesse buona giornata. Siamo sommersi di parole vuote, di pubblicità, di messaggi subdoli. Ci siamo abituati a sentire di tutto su tutti e rischiamo di scivolare in una mondanità che ci atrofizza il cuore.
Pope Francis also spoke of the need to care for the people around us. He invited Christians to fast from superficial things and instead contemplate the essential parts of life.